used to think about it madly. You want a conversation gladly, and I'm hoping oh so badly you can show me who is Scott Daddy.
All right. I've decided to do a little review of myself talking with a YouTuber named 1stAmender. It was just like a small debate, kind of, just in Discord. Obviously, I brought up morality because clearly I'm just obsessed with it and I can't stop talking about it, but that's neither here or there. Just a couple things I wanted to say about this. I have a lot of my positions really well reasoned out in my head and in my notes, my thinking, right? But where I really struggle is as a communicator. I struggle to present these ideas efficiently to people to where they make sense, even sometimes to where they can't even find a disagreement because they don't even understand. So yeah, that the fault there is on me. However, I will say it's also kind of it's an idea that steers away from where Western moral philosophy has been for hundreds of years. So I think a lot of us are just stuck in this way of thinking about, well, morality only describes like prescriptive claims or ought claims. You have to do this or that. It can't just describe natural facts. But to me, that's what the whole debate is. Is it natural facts or is it these floating in the air, non-existent, my opinion things, right? I'm trying to argue that there is a natural system, there is natural properties where morality arises from, and that's what we're describing when we use moral language. So anyway, it's mostly my fault as a communicator, but I also think there's a little bit of hang up with people just not being able to think outside the box a little bit because of hundreds of years of just philosophy being stuck in this mode. Anyway, I want to say the thank you to 1stAmender for doing this. You can find him at 1stAmender on YouTube. He does debates every week on Thursday nights, I believe. He just does them in the Modern Day Debate Discord. So yeah, check him out if you like what he's saying, all that, and I just definitely appreciate him hosting these and letting me on. So yeah, again, want to say started off a little weak with communicating, but also so he had a list of things to pick from, and I chose one. When I read it, I thought it said you can't have a cogent moral theory as an atheist or something like that. But as he was bringing me on, I reread it again to present it to him, and I realized it said can, and I was like, oh, like I was coming to defend the fact that, anyway, you'll hear it, but that threw me off, and I wasn't really actually ready to defend my objective morals. Like I didn't have any of my notes pulled up or anything, so it quickly went into him wanting me to present my theories, so that threw me off a little bit. I was trying to actually criticize his subjective moral framework, and I think this happens a lot with subjectivists in the fact that if I'm trying to criticize subjectivism for any reason at all, they tend to just flip it on me and say that, well, what's your moral theory then? Like, what's your objective? How can you have an objective framework, right? And that's fine. Like, I'm ready to, I should be ready to defend my positions at all time. But it just seems like they're conceding right away to say, well, yeah, this is what we're stuck with. It has problems, but where else do we go? So I was trying to kind of actively push for the criticism of the subjective framework, and he was wanting me to present my theory, and then another guy came on, and let's just say I think the topics were getting spewed all over the place. Again, it's fine. It's not a big deal. I'm just explaining. Who knows? I call myself hedgelord lately because I sit here and explain everything before I get into it, and then Look at me. I'm explaining the explaining. I'm like meta hedging right now. So anyway, let's just
You
fucking
get
go. Shut up.
so much tech points. It is actually nuts. Like how much points you get for killing lots of enemies. Right.
Okay, let's get to where we need.
I actually have a
It says you can be an atheist and have a cogent moral system,
yes.
and I thought you were saying that you can't.
Oh,
So I was coming up to defend that, but I wonder though, because I know
let's hear your cogent system then.
Well, okay. I mean, I wonder if you would mind me asking you a question about subjectivity first,
Mhm.
because you say that you can be an atheist and have a cogent moral system, but I'm wondering if you think you can be a subjectivist and have a cogent moral system.
Subjectivist and have a cogent moral system.
So this was me trying to
subjectivist-
criticize it here.
What do you mean by a subjectivist? I don't know what that means. You're gonna
Like
have to help me with
morality
that.
is all subjective.
Oh, yeah, that would be me.
Right.
A cogent moral. Okay, yeah. So I'll go ahead and try to explain it as best as I can. I actually have a.
I think I
Part-
need to
It
would take the position that you can't have a cogent system
Okay.
as a subjectivist.
B. Should the hot cup of coffee includes all living
Okay,
organisms?
he goes into
So, hey, atheist, where do you get your morality from? By the way, I did write this myself. This is my own writing, so just listen closely.
I
Morality
like-
comes from a long evolutionary pathway of survival. The desire of survival is entropic. But what could that possibly mean? These words are not random. Entropy is a strictly mechanistic function of the universe. All matter results in one form of entropy or another, which includes all living organisms. Entropy, to place it into understandable terms, is where things go from a finite, higher energy state into a lower energy state of less interaction into chaos. Think about a hot cup of coffee. Should the hot cup of coffee be in the middle of a room, eventually the cup of coffee will exude its energy out from the coffee and out into the room. The result is the coffee now matches the temperature of the room, and the room becomes slightly hotter. The energy is now spread out and can no longer interact. All organisms operate with this universal principle. Think if I took a single-celled eukaryote, as in possessing a cell wall, a nucleus, a mitochondria, with cilia, little hairs that provide locomotion, and put a hot poker beside it. The hot poker exudes out its energy out from the hot poker through entropy. The energy touches the cell wall of the eukaryote and then mechanistically begins binding the chemicals of the cell walls, cascading into a series of proteins which excites the motors of the cilia to then cause the eukaryote to swim away. The eukaryote, as a result...
So all of this, he's presenting a case that everything's just mechanistic, essentially. Because I've talked to him before, and I sort of tried to make the argument that, universally speaking, all life values basically survival or persisting in its own being and thriving in its own being. And we had to hang up a little bit because he was saying that most of life doesn't actually value. It's just sort of mechanistic. It just happens, right, on its own, and which I ended up agreeing with, right? And instead I started calling it a biological imperative, just something that biology does inherently, involved in all life. This is something that all life is striving toward, or even striving, I guess, implies some will or something, but I think you get the gist. It's just like this imperative that all life does, and that's what he's laying out here, is that it's just mechanistic. I think to say that, there's no value to all life, and only humans kind of ascribe this value.
result never thought about survival. It has no brain to perceive the desire of survival. It never felt that it would die should it run away. It simply runs entirely out of mechanistic notions. I do not believe humans are much different, though. Our form of survival is much more complex due to the fact that we are a social species. However, this would just be thinking us like the eukaryote, but with extra steps. So we propagate ourselves by being a social species. This means that we mechanistically attempt to work together, and we mechanistically desire survival. Indeed, even the suicidal person will flinch when you swing your fist at them. Survival is entropic. It must happen independent of our desire for it to happen. Our understanding of morality, while subjective, is predicated on the desire of survival, which is chemically determined. Therefore, we create our moral understanding off of survival, and which does not propagate survival, serves to destroy it, is considered wrong entirely off of mechanistic means. There.
Okay, and so I wish right here I would have just, and maybe I did actually, but I basically agree with all of these notions, right? And not all life just like values it or desires survival in the same way that humans might rationalize or desire things that way. But I tried to clear the air a little bit here with determinism, because to me doesn't necessarily matter if we're ascribing value, but what matters is the description of what's happening. And this is my whole disagreement, or my whole claim as a moral naturalist actually, is that the language we created for moral systems, for moral statements, judgments, and all that actually has a referent to the natural world. There are properties and interactions in the natural world that we're describing when we use moral language. So deterministic or not doesn't really matter, because the language we came up with to describe it is the point that I'm making. And this is the point that I failed to communicate. I don't know what happened, but let's just see moving forward. Okay, so sounds like basically at the heart of it is determinism, I imagine. Like, these mechanisms are just sort of determined to happen this way. I didn't fully grasp the connection to why that makes morality subjective.
Well,
So I don't know if you could better
yeah, I
explain
mean, our
that.
discussion on like morality, it is subjective because we come to like interpretations of what we consider to be good or wrong, but that there's like a stage that everybody has to operate on that is the same no matter where you are, so we come to similar conclusions. Right, so it's subjective, but like we tend to like favor survival. So like even things such as like, I don't know, providing food to the group of people, it's seen as a good thing because it like propagates survival.
Okay, so by the way, I agree with a lot. And in fact, last time we talked and debated about this, I remember you saying it's weird how much we agree on, but we have different stances on it. Is determinism a big part of this, or should I let that arc go? Because
I mean, it's not necessary.
it's like, does free will matter for you? Like, do you think you
Well,
have
free
to
will.
have a type?
I don't believe free will exists.
Do you think you need that for an objective moral system, though, or do
No.
you think? Okay. So that was actually a good hump for us to get over. I think I got hung up on that too much, because he easily was like, no, that doesn't matter. I'm like, oh, cool. So, and I just wanted to bring this up real quick, because the whole thing, what I was trying to criticize was that you can't have a cogent subjective moral theory, right? And I had this pulled up when talking to him to try and analyze his system as being clear, logical, and convincing. And I kind of actually throughout, I realized that this is kind of a dumb, or the convincing part of this definition is kind of fucking stupid, because like being convinced of something is I guess subjective in itself. Like, clear and logical makes sense, right? If it's understandable, sort of follows principles of logic. But to say it's convincing seems just like a weird addition. But I think I was focusing on that, and I almost wanted to be like, well, you're just not convincing me. But what I was trying to get at with it not being cogent is that it's not logical, because you're off the bat admitting that morals don't exist. They're just subjective. And at the same time, making moral claims, moral statements, moral prescriptions about the world, about politics. So it's like this contradiction, because you're admitting that this system you're using is pretend, or subjective, made up, while simultaneously trying to utilize it as a working system. I never got there, but that was what I was attempting to go for in the end. So determinism isn't necessarily getting in the way of an objective moral framework.
No.
Okay, cool. Um, so yeah, what you were explaining about like evolution and everything, like the mechanisms just sort of working how they do, they're not reasoning about it, right? Like I agree with that. And I think last time what I said to you was that it's like a biological imperative, right? Not
Mhm.
necessarily like a value, it's just something all life does. Um, and in a lot of what you were describing also, you were describing a lot of interactions between things, between different mechanistic things, right? And
Mhm.
when things interact in certain ways, like new things are formed, whether they're emergent properties or just new properties, however you want to look at it. Um, so I don't think it's just about survival necessarily, even though that's something all life strives toward. It's about
Morality
how
would you?
we. Okay, this is, and by the this is my first time watching this, so you just have to believe me. Whatever, I don't care. This is my first time watching it, so I'm like realizing as we go, this was a huge fall off the cliff into failure valley for me as a communicator because I actually started going in to try and describe my moral system. The critique I just gave right before this was where I should have taken that. I should have stuck to critiquing a subjective moral system, but I saw the chance to try and lay out part of my moral system, which is that things interact, right? There's natural properties in the world. When they interact, new properties arise. A good example is like H2O and water as we know it kind of comes from that, right? There's a lot of different examples, but I was bringing this up because it's key to my moral framework in the sense that morals arise from systems of relations between like conscious beings, right? So there's natural properties in the world, namely humans evolving, surviving, and they're social creatures who interact and engage in relations with each other. And those properties are the grounding for our moral language, what we're describing when we make moral judgments and statements. So I started going into that, and yeah, that was completely my bad. He didn't even ask. I just I just went into
You
it.
say it's
So
not stemming off of survival.
it's yeah. So the part of morality would be how we operate in a system with each other, how we relate to each other in a system. Basically, that's why I brought up the relations thing, right? Because you just like and so I guess you know what, you might be right. It might ultimately go down to survival even here because you wouldn't exist without a system of relations essentially, and that includes more than just people. It includes the ecosystem, trees for oxygen, right? Like you exist in like a web of relations essentially, and that's where I think we ground our moral language. I'm not saying it's like grounded metaphysically or supernaturally or like some like
Mhm.
transcendent. I wish I didn't say not grounded metaphysically, because I was right to say I don't see it as this supernatural, transcendental thing, right? But metaphysics can include a natural system. I mean, you can be a materialist. That's a position on metaphysics. Um, I hate when people conflate metaphysics with like supernatural, transcendental, whatever. Although those things fit under the category of metaphysics, metaphysics includes any type of system, like view that you have on the universe or the world or reality. And so I can't not believe, I can't believe I did that because yeah. Anyway, dental thing. I'm saying that when we use moral language, I think the natural fact that we're trying to ground it in as people, what we're trying to explain is this system of relations we exist in order to better survive.
Yeah, I mean, like,
And I actually think I described that halfway okay, because I came out of this thinking like I completely failed on my explanation. Um, I think I failed on sticking to the point and just keeping him on his heels about his subjective moral system, because that's what I came in to criticize, right? And then again, I just immediately went into my. It's because I'm too excited. I just too fucking
Like
excited.
one thing
to
that
talk
I've
about it,
noticed
I
is that
guess.
people, they tend to, like, I feel like they desperately want their morality to be objective,
Look at that.
but
Why I got so excited.
I don't think it's like necessary for like it to matter. Does that make sense? Like a lot of people like equate subjective, therefore doesn't matter. I think that's like the issue.
Yeah, and so I would definitely disagree. I think it does matter absolutely, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's
I'm
not
saying
just
like
if mine.
subjective things matter is my point.
Well, sure, but like they don't really matter as far as your prescriptions about our commute, like social, political lives, our global interaction, right? Like I understand they matter to you, and you have reasoned out positions that you think are convincing, and you're just trying to convince other people. But like, and this is why I brought up the cogent thing, because what you explained, like, it was a good explanation of a system working and operating, but it wasn't like a cogent moral system in any
Hmm.
way.
Why is it not cogent?
Well, because you basically said morality is not real. So how could you have a
No,
cogent moral
subjectivity
system?
doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Okay, but if more like if moral systems don't exist, how can you have a
No,
cogent
I
moral
never
system?
said moral systems don't exist. I said moral systems are subjective, and subjectivity doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Okay, well, I guess you just didn't really make an argument as to why this. The hang up here was I was using real as in moral realism, which typically means objective, like stance independent, right? So he was taking me to be saying real as in it doesn't exist at all, when obviously it exists in people's minds, right? He's saying it is real to each one of our subjective minds. But I was using real in the sense of like moral realism. Like there is an objective moral system that we can discuss. Subjective moral system works or is good or anything. You just explained why it's not real. So it's
You,
not really convincing that it's a like
why? I'm
a
sorry. Why?
cogent
What
moral
is not
system.
real?
Wait, what?
Why? What is not real?
Sorry, when I'm saying real, I'm saying like we can speak about it objectively. I'm not so like you're saying it's real in someone's mind, right? And I'm just saying
No.
real
So
as
like
in
subjective just means that it's up for someone, a human interpretation.
right. I understand. So I understand that you know it's real in the minds of people. I'm just saying when I'm saying real, like I'm saying moral realism, like I'll just start trying to say objective
Are
instead
you
of
are
like
you like
not
a
real.
moral realist? Do you believe in objective morality?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I thought I made that part clear. So maybe this one isn't all on me, but I'm still okay taking the blame because I'm trying to be a better, more effective communicator. So
How's the
I was
morality?
just
How is your
looking for the
morality
case.
how is it
Hold
objective?
on. I already explained that a little bit, but I still just want you to make the case that a subjective moral system is cogent because all you explained was that life has mechanisms and operates. You didn't explain how a subjective moral system is cogent.
Uh, Cogent just means it makes sense, right? We
Clear,
mechanistically
logical, and
desire
convincing.
survival. We derive
Yeah.
our morality off of survival. That is a cogent argument.
It's a cogent argument, yes, but it's not a moral system, right? Like you can just say like, yeah, we evolved because of survival and then like we started having opinions about morality because of the way it affect our survival, but that's just purely being descriptive about what's happening. You're not you're not breaking down a moral system such as like, you know, that like in my opinion we can find principles such as like violation of the will is bad, or like to have a moral system you have to have sort of like stances on why your principles make the most sense. Even if it's subject, you can have a subjective system and have it you know, like try to have it make sense to describe to someone else, but you can't just like merely describe where you think our attitudes about morality come from. you have to have like guiding principles to have an actual moral system. There's plenty subjectivist systems. I don't think they're cogent. Other people do, right? People way smarter than me. But you have to be able to describe why they're cogent and why they make sense. Like emotivism, for example, that's just a system of like, well, whenever I say like don't hit somebody, I'm just expressing that I personally think that's bad and you shouldn't do it, and that's it. Like that's emotivism, right? So you're saying that's where we derive our morals, but you're not
Correct.
saying like what makes a cogent moral system,
Well,
and
that is a
that was
cogent
what I
moral
was.
system. I just explained it.
That's a cogent moral like grounding of like
Yes.
explanation
So
of why
yeah, it's
morals
asking
exist,
where I get my
but
morality
not a
from.
moral system. Okay, the problem here is, and by the way, this grounding that I just gave him is also a part of my grounding as like a realist, right? So he's using this descriptive property about the natural world, natural facts, to ground his morality in, which I also do. He just then doesn't take it a step farther to say that this is what we're describing with our moral language, and therefore it can be true and false because there's natural properties that we're describing what a moral system is. Because a moral system is a system of like principles and reasons why you should or should not do something based on X principle or whatever. Like, you're just saying why morality is a thing. You're not explaining why a system could be cogent.
I feel like if I make like an explanatory process that goes from A to B to B to C, and every single step makes sense, you seem to agree with every step, that's a cogent system.
Okay, so here's the problem. I'm going to try and think of an example. So if I were to say like, how does basketball work, or like explain like basketball to me? This is probably a bad example, but I'm just, and then you went into like the Big Bang unfolding and eukaryotes evolving, and then complex species arising, and then we're in this process of evolution, and now humans interact with each other, and they start communicating through language. They start like having fun together in their off time. They come up with a sport, and now they play basketball. That in no way explained basketball to me. That explained how basketball arose, like what happened to get us here. But what I'm trying to ask for for a cogent subjective system in the analogy would be like, okay, this is how basketball works. There's one ball. It's about this big. There's 5 people playing on the court on each team, right? They go back and forth. There's a basket on each side, and like, that's what I'm asking for. I'm not asking like where it came from, why it's here. I'm asking for the system, like how it operates in a subjective way and makes sense. Yeah, I agreed with you that like our sense of morality came from evolution, just like our sense for everything else. Like, yeah, but you're not describing a moral system. You're describing why humans engage morally. That's it.
Okay, so well, I mean, then it comes down to like, well, what are your external sense stimulus that leads to greater survival, right? In some areas, for example, Sharia law is absolutely propagating their survival, but in other areas, that doesn't propagate their survival. In fact, it deters that survival, right? It depends on what portion of Earth you're in, right? A harsh desert or a plentiful, like, do you see what I'm saying?
So are all of those cogent moral systems, even though they operate differently?
I mean, I don't think that like religions are a cogent moral system, but I understand them.
But like cultural moral systems, like, here's where I should have came in there and said, well, how can religions not be a cogent moral system if every moral system's subjective? If it's all just our subjective opinion, then how can any of those not be cogent? Like, they're at least as cogent as yours, and I would probably argue more because they're building a system of moral principles off of the grounding that they found. It seems like me and Amender both agree that there's a type of grounding or like natural properties where moral thoughts and language came from. But I don't think he wants to take the step further to say that, well, because that's where the moral language came from, we should just ground it in that and like find an objective system there to build. Like you were explaining, like
Yeah, like take for example, like have you read the books of Dune or watched the movies by any chance?
no, my friends
haven't
keep
watched
begging
those
me to
yet.
watch Dune.
There's like a series of natives that are called the Fremen. And the Fremen are like a group of natives that live on a desert planet. And one thing that they did to greet people is they would spit where you are because they were offering their body's moisture as like kind of like a mini sacrifice, because any amount of water is like incredibly valuable. So they are giving your body's water, but like it was seen as an insult to people that were not on desert planet. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a great point about contextualism, and I don't think contextualism takes away from objectivism. It just means that how relationships operate can look different depending on the environment they're in, right? And it makes sense, and even in this different culture, right? There's still a moral principle. He said the word sacrifice, right? They're using their moisture, they're sacrificing a little bit as a show of respect. So although the context is different, we still value sacrifice as a respectful thing, like something. So like if I wanted to go to the movies, right, but then suddenly my sister needed help with something and she was desperate for help, me sacrificing my time and my pleasure to go help her is a good thing, right? She really appreciates. That's a good thing in our relationship. She appreciates that. So even in the different contexts, the different environment, this principle of sacrifice still exists. It just looks different because the environment's different.
Absolutely.
So like
it's like contextual.
The morals are it kind of come from your external sense stimulus. Your environment is what makes it.
Yeah. So
See, we
I
agree
agree
on-
absolutely that it's contextual, by the way, but I think things can be contextually objective. Like if you're a third party observer looking down upon like some other system that's operating, you can actually determine like how they're using moral language and what's good and bad just as an observer. The same way you can observe animals and their behaviors, right?
Sure, but I mean, again, it's still propagated off of survival.
Yeah. So I think a lot of this, at least for me, this is like my approach with it, is that a lot of it boils down to like our language, and we've just been convinced that what objective morality means is this like either God or some metaphysical universal principle or some weird shit like that. But and this is all the is ought thing that you brought up, right? We all think that like the ought portion is the important thing in language, but like I'm trying to say that it's the is part
Well,
that's important.
oughts are
What we're
morality.
talking about in our moral systems is the way we're engaging in relations with each other. That's literally every action that happens in the relation is what we're determining to be good or bad. And with that, we can actually like determine and sort of objectively measure what would be better or worse for those systems of relations.
Okay, I'm not exactly following at this point.
Okay, well, I mean, do you want me to retry, or do you want to ask something?
Yeah, you
or
can try again.
I could. So basically, I'm saying when we use moral language, when we're
Mhm.
making moral judgments and statements,
Okay.
we are pointing to a referent in the real world, in the objective world, the natural world. What we're pointing to is the system of relations, or just individual relations in general, and actions being good or bad in that system of relations. Now, most like I said, since David Hume, everyone's been on this is ought kick, right? Everyone thinks we're talking about oughts, like you should do this, should do that, but those don't exist anywhere. The only like maybe way those exist
But
is if
it
you have enough
exists in
power to
morals.
just
What do you mean?
take. No, they don't. I mean, objectively, they don't exist. Like they're not a real thing. They're just in our minds.
Wait, you just conceded the argument just now.
See, No. this is where, again, maybe this is my fault as a communicator, but it seemed like he completely missed my argument about using language incorrectly. That for hundreds of years we've been stuck on this thought that when we use moral language, it's describing this little magical ought that exists only in my mind, right? This subjective thing that no one else can verify. And I'm trying to make the claim that that's incorrect, that actually our moral language arose, and our behavior, even aside from language, our moral behavior arose because we're social creatures engaging in relations with each other. And when we say good and bad, we're describing those relations being good or bad for each party. And I feel like everyone's just so stuck on this idea that moral language only refers to oughts and opinions, right? See, this is the problem. You like literally didn't follow me so much that I just tried to explain that we have been using I think we've been using the language incorrectly. We're not describing oughts, we're describing ises. Oughts don't exist. And
In morals,
so I
yes.
don't think you followed that part. He
In
still
anything.
didn't They don't exist in anything.
Then that means morality is subjective.
Oh, so is everything subjective because oughts don't exist? I don't know if you'll ever see this or anything, and I hope you don't think I'm being offensive, but I think the problem is like you're so convinced 100% that the language of morality is describing oughts that you literally can't even hear me saying that I'm arguing it's describing natural properties. So when I say oughts don't exist, you're just like, oh yeah, well, morality is subjective then. Because it's just like, it's not computing that I'm telling you, I don't think our moral language is talking about that. It's talking about a referent to natural properties in the world.
No, I don't believe all oughts don't exist. But in terms of
Okay,
morality,
what's an
yeah,
ought
that
that
would be the
exists?
case.
What's an ought that exists?
Huh? Morals.
What?
Yeah.
You just said moral oughts don't exist.
No, that's your argument.
I think we're also getting hung up on the words of exist here and objective. I should stop using like real and exist and just stick to the objective part, because I was just trying to explain, like, I understand that oughts exist in people's minds, right? But they're not like some objective feature, or there's not a natural property in the world that we're describing with oughts. We're giving opinions, right? And to him, that's me conceding to subjective morality. But I'm saying, no, morality is describing the natural world. I said oughts don't exist anywhere aside from our minds. And when I say exist here, I mean they don't, like, there's not a natural property in objective reality that we're describing. It's just, so that's poor language. I've been
Oh
hearing you like describe some empirical facts to people, right?
Uh-huh.
With the data that you have, all the studies, all the science, all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
That data can mean shit to someone. There's no ought in you saying like you should believe this now because I said so. Like you can try.
Well, it is if you operate a
way.
concept of propagation of survival.
What?
If you operate with the axiom that we ought survive, we can derive all sorts of moral imperatives from that.
Okay, that's an objective system, right? You just have to take the axiom and then it becomes objective. This is why subjectivism doesn't make sense. If you're going to propagate a principle such as survival like this, right, then like, welcome to the club. You're basically using a hypothetical imperative saying once you accept that survival is what we're all aiming for, then we can come to objective principles on how to better do that, right?
However,
What I'm
subjective.
saying, I'm trying to compare it to empiricism. I'm trying to say there's no oughts in anything. I can
There's
bring
no
you
odds
all
in
the
empiricism. It just tells you what things are.
right, and that's what
Exactly.
I'm
That's my whole
arguing that
point.
the
Is it
language
like
is the
we
same
ought
for
observe?
morals. I'm saying the language is the same for morals. There's just a natural system that's operating, and humans can observe that system, and they make choices on what's good and bad, because you can actually objectively measure what's good and bad for relations. Like, that's something you could empirically do if you studied it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm saying we're describing. We're not describing the oughts. We're describing an objective feature of reality.
All right. If we want to live, you ought breathe. Tell me that
Yeah,
that
you
ought
just did
does
a
not exist.
hypothetical imperative. You just did a hypothetical imperative.
Well, I'm giving you an
The
example
ought
of an
exists.
ought that objectively exists.
No, I could still breathe. Like, I could still
If you
hold my
want to
breath.
live, you ought breathe.
Yeah, but I can do that with morality too. It's called a hypothetical imperative. I brought this up to you last time.
What?
It's like
I'm
it's an
so lost,
if-then
dude. I'm
statement.
trying.
Yeah, so this, if you want to live, then you ought to breathe, right? That's a hypothetical imperative, suggesting that, like, well, if you value X thing, then there are objective ways to accomplish X thing. If X, then Y, right? And so, in the same way with morality, we can describe natural features, natural properties about the world, right? What we're talking about when it comes to morality. And by the way, even in a subjective system, this is what we're talking about. Even if it's just your opinion, you're still making moral statements about how you relate to other people and how they relate to other people. So even in a subjective system, it's still rooted in how we all relate to each other. And the actions we take against each other or for each other, whatever. So, I went on a side tangent there. So yeah, the if-then statement, right? So that is just making a hypothetical imperative. If then, or if X, then Y, right? It's not like, it's more like a logical structure. If you value this, then you ought to do that. So for my hypothetical imperative, right, I'm saying there is natural properties, objective in the world that we can observe, measure the relations, how they're existing with each other, what's good and bad for those relations, right? So if you value how we thrive together as a society, then you ought behave this way, right? I can do the same thing in my moral system if that's what it takes for you to think that it's now objective all of a sudden, right? But like, even the statement, if you want to live, then you should breathe, that's not like some it's only objective because of the condition that you set, right? And you can look at morality in the same way.
I'm trying to
Yeah,
follow
I
you.
can tell, dude. I honestly, like, you're not understanding my language argument, and I think that's part of the problem. But, and it could be me. Like, I sometimes struggle to explain it. But yeah, what you just did is a hypothetical imperative.
But
It's
that's
an
a
if-then
guaranteed. You
statement.
said oughts
If
do
you
not
value-
exist.
Well, if you're saying that ought exists, when I say oughts don't exist in objective, I'm saying there's no natural property in the objective world where oughts just exist, right? I mean, actually, I guess you could argue that the natural property is the human, the subject, the experiencer, and that's sort of where oughts emerge from. But that's purely subjective, right? So that's the whole point. There's no like objective natural property where oughts exist. However, there is objective natural properties where moral language resides. Like when we're just talking about like, hey, don't punch me. I don't like that. That's bad for our relation, right? That's bad. So no one has to care about that. Like, I can sit and tell someone over and over, it's bad to assault me. Like, don't do that. It's bad for relations, right? They don't have to care. They can just sit and assault me. Like, that's their own subjective mind caring about it or not. It's right there.
Yeah.
Then I can easily say so do objective moral oughts, because I can say if you value life, then you ought do this.
But
like,
I don't believe like if it's an ought, therefore it's objective. Like it's just you value things. Like the fact that
I
we
see
value
here.
survival.
This is on me. This is on me. Again, it's just the language use, because yeah, I'm an idiot here, actually. Fucking stupid. Because I've now used 3 different words to refer to the same thing. And he's interpreting the words more accurately than I am. So I'm saying existing, right? When I'm saying morals don't exist, again, I'm saying they don't exist in objective natural world, right? Or like objective properties that we can all observe. They only exist in a subject. So, but he's taking the word exist as in they just don't exist at all. They're nowhere. But so he's right here. Like they do exist. And I'm conflating that term with objective. I'm conflating real with objective because I'm sort of going with the moral realism arc. So I think what I need to do better here is just stick to the word objective. I don't know why I'm like changing the language and just confusing him about it. Because I agree they exist. I'm trying to say that like oughts aren't just objective natural properties that we can observe. The ises are though, right? And this is why there's the is-ought gap. But what I was trying to explain when it comes to empiricism, right? There's also an objective-subjective gap, right? I can have all the data right here, like say just about this water bottle, right? Made of metal, it's hard. I can give you all sorts of natural properties about the is. This is the natural facts, natural properties about this. But the subject I'm explaining it to in no way, shape, or form is compelled to agree with me. He can touch it and say, well, that's plastic because that's how I'm interpreting the data, right? That's probably a ridiculous example, but it's just, if you're going to go down this skepticism arc that like you can't get an ought from an is, that would just fully make like anything, including empiricism, skeptical too. Like no one has to interpret the data the same way you do or the same way, like even if there's an entire consensus, me as a subjective mind, there's no compulsion for me to just believe you and believe the data you're presenting me, right? I have to perform the ought myself. So if you're gonna say that the is-ought gap is effective for morality, then it's also effective for everything else. And that there's just no way that for individual subjective minds to actually verify with each other the objective world, because we're filtering it all through a subjective mind.
Survival, like that in itself is effectively
that's
subjective.
what makes it objective. You have to.
Well, it's
like,
about as close
take
that we
up
can
the
get to it being objective, but as to how we get through that survival, that's where it becomes subjective, for sure.
Wait, you think
Yeah, you have
how
different external
people
sense
survive?
stimulus that lead to a conclusion. Yeah.
So this
Well,
is,
yeah,
but
he's
he's just saying that we disagree on how to get there, which is fine. I agree with that, right? Like, and in the same way, people can disagree that the Earth is flat or round, right? I don't think that us disagreeing on how to get there means it's subjective. It just means we're interpreting the data a certain way through our subjective experience. And to be honest, I think a lot of it just stems from selfishness. Like, we actually would be able to recognize these systems easier if more people actually just cared, right? If you just cared to try and make better systems, then we would do much better on converging on objective principles to do so. There's still an objective, better way for people to survive, right? Whether the individual recognizes it or not.
Like a theoretical best survival technique? I guess so. Maybe.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
But then it comes down to like, why ought we survive? It's still subjective.
I don't argue for odds. That's the whole point I'm trying to make to you. this is where I went off the rails. This is where it gets embarrassing because I do, obviously, I think everyone argues for aughts to some degree, right? I'm not sure where I was trying to go here. This is a complete mistake. I'm gonna put it on my YouTube anyway to just show how dumb I can be. Wait, let's
Huh?
see. Like, I
Well,
think
you're
your ought exists right there.
Yeah.
Then I can easily say so
Empirical.
do objective moral oughts, because I can say if you value
I like
life,
that
then
too,
you ought do
but-
this.
But
Like,
I don't believe it's still
I don't
subjective.
make I don't argue for oughts. I think what I'm trying to say when I'm saying I don't argue for oughts is to just say that I try to focus on the natural properties in general. The fact that there's a system here we can talk about and use moral language to be true and false. Because if we can just recognize that, then people can sort of develop oughts around it, right? There's no way to compel someone. Like, obviously, just in day-to-day life, I will say things to people like, you should probably do this, or, but you know, a lot of times I hedge it with like, well, if you care about this, then you, right, I'm just trying to actually advise them. So when I say I try not to argue for oughts, it's because I understand that all of us as subjective creatures have to come to conclusions ourselves. Even with empirical data, we have to see the data, intake it, reason about it, and then make our own prescriptions about how we should behave. So, like, even if someone believes in the most authoritarian God, whose like divine command is objective morality, right? Even in that system, I can still say, well, I don't care about what you say, God, just send me to hell. Like, there is literally no compulsion to do anything at all. So there's just the natural facts, and then people reasoning about the natural facts and coming to their conclusions from there. And this is where I should have brought up virtue ethics, because virtue ethics would be my best sort of prescription of like what someone should do in their individual life to be a better moral person, right? And it's a selfish thing too, because I would argue it leads to the most fulfilling life. I'm not going to get too into it right now, but basically I recognize 4 virtues as being the most important: wisdom, or reasoning and rationality, spiritedness, or basically emotional IQ, having like the courage to back up your reasoning, things like that, moderation, in the sense that obviously you don't engage in vices so much so that they impede your entire life, right? But also I would say you shouldn't just repress and suppress desires either. Like, that also can lead to impeding on your life. You should enjoy pleasurable things so long as they don't impede on your life. And then the 4th one being justice, which is our sense of being a social creature, because that's what we are. We've evolved as social creatures, and our sense of justice is a virtue in the way we interact and engage in relations with others. So this is the perfect spot that I should have brought up the virtue ethics part. So that's the whole point I'm trying to make to you.
Huh?
Like,
Well,
I think
you're
you're like
arguing-
really stuck on the idea that morals
Are subjective, yes.
that
I'm very
morals
stuck on
are
that.
describing oughts, and that's the point that I think
They
you're
do.
not understanding that I'm making.
Morals
I'm
do
making the
des-
claim
morals
that
do
moral
describe oughts.
statements describe
That's
a system
all
of
of morals
relations
is
in
oughts.
relation. See, and I should have made him like explain why.
They're all oughts.
Why he
So-
thinks that. Yeah. Well, why do you think that though? Oh, I did. Okay.
Well, because like a moral is like, okay, well, thou shalt not do blank. 'Cause
That's a
blank.
commandment. That's a commandment.
I mean,
right?
but that's like a moral system, is it not?
That's a moral commandment, maybe.
Is that not a moral system?
Moral is principles
And
concerning.
you can have laws, you can have declarations, statements. All of those
Yeah.
would be a moral.
So
a moral
morals
implication.
is moral. The definition is concerned with principles of right and wrong behavior. So that definition can work for your subjective system or the system I'm describing. Because if my language is talking about a system of relations in the natural world, then that system is also concerned with principles of right and wrong behavior. So yeah, that is a moral system describing a natural. And And I didn't leave out this second half to be unfaithful or anything. I genuinely thought just the first half here was key. Like, that just, it almost just reiterated goodness and badness of character, right? Like, this is how we relate to other people. And then this right here, the goodness and badness of human character, is like sort of our virtue, our relation with ourself, right? Just how we ourselves engage in good or bad behavior, how we feel about it, essentially. So I just thought that this was the most important piece. I don't know, maybe you could see that as bad faith, but I wasn't trying to be. And I think the point I'm making is good. Like, this definition of moral works for, even if I'm right that morals are describing the natural properties, this still works, right? Principles of right and wrong behavior within those relations, those natural properties. Or it also works for a subjective or whatever moral system, a feature of reality.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I don't know what to say to that. You're losing me here. But if you want, I can tag it. It looks like Tuss is really itching to speak on.
I'm not gonna. He brought on another guy, but I have gone way longer than I expected now. That should be expected. I was thinking maybe I could bust this out in like a half hour or something, and here I am at an hour. Sorry, Tuss. It's not that I don't want to review it or anything. I actually have to go. Like, I've spent too much time. Anyway, 1stAmender, if you're listening, or if not, no matter what, I'm very appreciative of you hosting this debate and letting me come on, as well as letting me stream it to review and put on my own channel. So at the end of the day, I was expecting this to be a lot worse. Again, I came in blind, and there were definitely some big faults on me, some major issues that I struggled communicating. But overall, I think I did halfway okay in attempting to describe it. So, I don't know, hopefully we can have discussions in the future. And thanks for anyone who watched.